Hello YouTube, welcome to MTGA, and today we are going to have a look at the balance changes coming up in 2 days. And yeah, let's jump right into it. First card, Sarek the Archlich. So this balance change doesn't matter because a Sarek this is specifically about the second line of text on a Sarek. Whenever a Sarek attacks, create a number, basically a 2/2. And then previously the opponent had the option of sacrificing a creature instead, but now you always get the 2/2. And having more options is basically always a straight buff. That doesn't matter. You're never going to attack with the Sarek. Sarek is never going to stay on the board. His whole purpose in Historic Brawl is to be bounced back to your hand by never going into the Tomb of Annihilation in the first place. So you don't care. So this doesn't matter. Assembled from parts. The ability used to cost 3 and a black to bring the card perpetually back to the graveyard, or like a copy of it, and then shuffle it back. But this is specifically good on commanders like Gonti that have a great ETB ability. I just did a Gonti video, check that one out. The Assemble of Parts is nutty in that deck. But yeah, the cost changed from 3 and a black to 1 and double black, so that's a buff for the most part, unless you're really struggling on black mana, which I don't imagine you do if you play this card in your deck. But yeah, overall a welcome change. Blood Rage Alpha. So they increased the toughness of this card. Now it's a 4 mana 4/4 baseline, which is a decent body. This is great in werewolf decks, and basically not seen play anywhere else. Like if you play werewolves, sure, nice buff, you don't need it, but if you don't, then you do not care. This card only sees playing werewolves. Cloister Gargoyle. So this used to be a 3 mana 0/4, but now it's a 2 mana 0/3. I think that is pretty much a buff. But yeah, venturing into the dungeon is not a very powerful mechanic, especially in Historic Brawl, and I don't think this will change that. However, Dungeon Descent. This card used to be, most importantly, this card used to come into play tapped. Now it's an untapped colorless land, which makes it worth to look at, basically. Just straight up by that fact, you can replace a basic with, in Ulamog, for example, with this. Now we have one more colorless land, right? So that's pretty cool. But also now, the activation cost has become decently reasonable. Now you don't need 4 to untap it and tap a legendary creature, but you only need 1 mana, and then you can venture into the dungeon. I still don't see this as too powerful. If it said draw a card straight up, I think that would be worth it, but venturing is not even worth half a card, so I don't see this being too powerful. Eliwick Tumblestorm. Now the ultimate costs 6 loyalty instead of 7, but that was never the problem with this card. The problem with this card is that it basically is too it comes down with not enough loyalty. The -2 is okay, but the +1 is just awful. It really doesn't impact the board whatsoever. She can't protect herself and thus won't see play. Fate's Reversal. This is an interesting one. This used to cost 1 black, now it only costs 1 black. So it's a 1 mana sorcery that can return a creature from the graveyard to hand. Venture into the dungeon is nice cherry on top, but 1 mana, bring a creature back from graveyard to hand. This matters for some decks, for example, the Extus Storm combo deck I did recently. That's a consideration in there, but I probably wouldn't even play that in there. But yeah, it's nice to have this effect, but ultimately I don't think the effect is good enough. Find the Path. Rules Adjustment. Basically a straight buff. This used to give the land, Enchanted Land has add 2 green, and now the Enchanted Land has add 2 mana of any one color instead, so that's a straight buff. I think this is a pretty nice buff because it gives you good, like it's good for 5-color decks as a budget option. For example, this is not good in Essica though because it adds 2 mana of the same color, so you actually can't cast a bridge on turn 4 off of that. But if you like 5-color, I think that's a decent budget option for you. Yeah, nice change. Puppet Razor used to be a 3/3, now a 3/4. This card, it's hard to find a home for this card. Basically, you want to play this in like decks that play to the board, I think, but it doesn't, like if it was a 4/3 maybe, but then you would also have to have the right shell. Like this, value wise, I see this as like something I would play in Naya, but probably not in black, right? Yeah, so I don't see this card being played, especially like who crafts this, right? This is a mythic for some reason. Precipitous Drop. You can see the trend. They're basically buffing all the adventure cards, and again, this is balanced around alchemy, and I want to make alchemy a thing in venturing into the dungeon a thing in alchemy. So I mean, I guess that's cool, but if this was 1 mana, well, maybe, right? Then it would be a slightly better, not Disfigure. We also have a Deadweight, right? This would be a slightly better Deadweight, but slightly better Deadweight, if this was 1 mana, would still not see too much play. Like, the only deck that might be happy about this buff is Lurrus, because now this is like really, really relevant, because you can now get this back with Lurrus where previously you couldn't. So that's the deck that cares about this change, but every single other deck I don't think doesn't care. Triumphant Adventurer, kind of a huge one. 1 additional power on a 2-drop is it's a big deal. It's a big deal, and the deck that cares about this is probably humans. Human Tribal in Kudro. They have a lot of good options, but I think Triumphant Adventurer is a decent one. It's a 2-mana 2/1 first strike death touch. Like, that thing really doesn't get blocked, and then when it attacks you also enter into a dungeon. Yeah, now this has relevant attack, and I like it. Card adjustments. These are basically nerfed cards. And now we're getting into the sad part of this whole thing. Well, starting with Divide by 0. Now you only learn if the spell or permanent you bounce to their hand has mana value 4 or less. You don't care. Like, learning wasn't really powerful to begin with in Historic Brawl because you could only use the like second mode of learn of discarding and drawing a card. So whatever. Fearsome Whelp. This wasn't like, this is not as big because we can only use 1 of these in our decks instead of 4, but it got a slight buff in that it now has haste, so that's nice, but you only get the cost reduction at your upkeep instead of the end step, so the opponent has the ability to use their sorcery speed interaction during their turn, sees 1 more card before they have to deal with it. And yeah, overall a nerf, but I think a reasonable. Hullbreaker Horror. Now it can get countered. They removed this spell can't be countered line. That's what they removed, and this is kind of huge, but the card is not dead. So this card is extremely powerful and potent in what it does. It You played this in a control mirror and it was basically over. And now the opponent has more time to interact with it, or like more options of interacting with it. So yeah, it's basically, it's worse, way worse than control mirrors now. But against like mono black, they can't counter anything. Like, unless the line only mattered against blue decks. Although blue decks are the biggest part of the metagame, right? So yeah. Like, card has been actually pretty nerfed for the matchup where this really mattered, but at the same time, the card is not super dead. Yeah, Inquisitor Captain got a nerf. Now the Inquisitor Captain only does its thing of like seeking 2 cards, putting 1 into battlefield, the other one shuffling back and whatnot. It only does that now when it is cast. So this was specifically to nerf a combo in alchemy, or like historic specifically. But now the decks that are going to feel these nerfs are like, if you played this in Yorion, you can't blink it anymore. Well, you can, but you don't get the trigger, right? And if you reanimated it, most decks that played this in historic Brawl don't necessarily care about this. Like, I'm thinking white aggro based decks where you don't reanimate this anyways, or like don't blink it anyways. And yeah, it's a minor inconvenience for some decks, but overall basically untouched for historic Brawl specifically. Leer, Disciple of the Drowned, and I loved Leer control in historic Brawl, and the deck is basically dead because Leer now can only flashback the cards during your own turn, making it basically so you need to just full out tap out with Leer if you want to use the full value, and you can't use reactive cards like give hexproof to things because you can't cast them in the graveyard during their turn. And yeah, whenever they like change a commander, I'm really not happy. Like basically just random commanders dying for the sins of alchemy. Right, like Omnath was a perfectly fine deck, 1 additional mana, it's dead. Right, Leer, same thing. How you would build Leer in historic Brawl now is probably just with Paradox Engine self-mill, and then just try to pop off in the same turn. But it doesn't really, I think it's a weaker version of Leer for sure. Some decks I used to like have Leer into 99. Specifically, I'm thinking about Grixis Control with the 5 mana Nicol Bolas, but that's pretty much not changed because like it is a slight nerf, but you would just like return. You could like Dark Ritual, Leer, Dark Ritual, bring a like board wipe back, right? Or you Leer and then duress, and those kind of play patterns don't really like get affected. But overall, yeah, really not a fan of this change. For historic World specifically, Leer was absolutely a fine card, but yeah, it died for the sins of alchemy and standard and whatnot. Sanguine Brushstroke, basically the most relevant nerf of them all. This used to say whenever you sacrifice a blood token, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Yeah, this is basically just 1 less life now. You don't care. I don't care. Nobody cares. Maybe Cleric life gains kind of cared, like black-white life gain strategies kind of cared, but other than that, yeah, not relevant. Now, Townraiser Tyrant. Townraiser Tyrant used to be able to target basic lands. Now it can only target non-basics. Unless you're playing against a monocolored deck, you're not going to feel this at all whatsoever. If you're playing against monocolored, yeah, then Townraiser maybe doesn't do its thing. But even monocolored decks like to play like colorless lands, utility lands, so yeah, basically unchanged. Card legality. This is an interesting one. Okay, in the whole article, I'm going to link the article in the description, by the way, and another one that talks about the bans in other formats where they basically just like don't talk about historic Brawl, right? Teferi Time Reveler gets rebalanced and unbanned in historic, basically, but they don't say anything about it getting unbanned in historic Brawl. I'm going to talk about the card though, as if it gets unbanned, but don't be surprised if that card is still banned in historic Brawl, right? So let's say we would get this new and rebalanced version of Teferi Time Reveler. What do I think about it? So first and foremost, it's 1 more mana. It has 1 more starting loyalty. And it also has the line of text remove. Your opponent can't cast spells during your turn. Well, basically it used to say your opponents can't cast spells at instant speed. Now they can only not cast spells during your turn. This basically makes the opponent able to play at instant speed during their turn, which is also very relevant, like, because it used to randomly stop things like Cascade as well, and that was pretty brutal. But let's look at this. They gave it 1 starting loyalty, which is basically the same as before. So if you would play it on 3 and then uptick it, it was basically on turn 4 the same loyalty as this now, right? So like it used to start at 4, played on 3, uptick, now it's at 5. Now turn 4, uptick, now it's at 6. Now you play this at turn 4, uptick, and now it's at 6 again. Okay, this part basically didn't change. Now, however, it costs 1 more, so that is massive. That is absolutely massive and extremely, like, it really removes some of the strong play patterns, because what you used to be able to do with the bounce is if you were on a play and the opponent often didn't have a 1-drop and then they only had a 2-drop to pressure this Teferi, but you could play it on 3 and just bounce their 2-drop, and now they had nothing, and Teferi was on a clean board, and that's very dangerous. Also, a play pattern you could do is play Teferi on 3, board wipe on 4. Now this costs 4, right? So it's kind of torn in between. What you can do now, however, is like it lines up with your mana rocks. But before that, you didn't even need your mana rocks. But now you can like mana rock and then play Teferi on turn 3 anyways, right? But overall, this is like a massive nerf. Like 1 more mana is really a big deal. And then the other part I really like they are dead set on like you can't remove Teferi in their end step anyway. Like if they play Teferi and you have like a murderous rider in hand, you want to kill the Teferi, can't do that. You have to wait until your turn. So that is still very powerful. But at least you can like the one side effect of Teferi Time Raveler was basically that all their counter magic was uncounterable, straight up. Because even if you played something during your turn and the opponent countered it, you couldn't play at instant speed whatsoever, and their counter spell would resolve. Now, at least during your turn, you can counter the opponent's counter spell to protect your things to kill this Teferi, which makes it way easier to remove, right? So yeah, overall, I think this is definitely a way more balanced version of the card. And I'm kind of excited to see it being played if we get the card in Historic Brawl, that is. But overall, I think these balance changes are ranging from Y to Y Wizards, and I mean, why not? Right? Sure. So it's why Wizards, and why not? Those are like... I could probably live... like, I would love to just this thing to not happen, because it is either extremely irrelevant or just like why? Why? That's basically my final verdict. Why? Hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you tomorrow.